Welcome to the next in our series on Agile Basics.
And today we want to talk about user stories. It's a term that confuses a lot of people when they first start with Scrum or Agile projects because it sounds different than a requirement and it's just phrased a different way. We'll talk about the semantics and define how best to use a user story. So what is a user story exactly? Well, our definition of user story is a requirement converted to be in the format of what a user would expect in their functionality. And I want you to also think of this from the standpoint of the overall sprint review and demo process. Something is going to be functionality that could be included in a demo, something visual, a key component. You're not going to put a task such as update database to show, update, middle tier code, things like that. That's a requirement, but that's not a user story. A user story is going to be something like, as a web user, I need to be able to log into a home page to be able to see X, Y, and Z functionality. It's phrased like that. That's just one example of many, but that's effectively what a user story is, a requirement that's going to be rolled up into code that can be demoed, and we'll talk about specifics here in just a little bit.
And in most projects, the requirement, the user story is going to come from the business. And the product owner on the project team represents the requests, the requirements, and the needs of the business. So the product owner should drive the user story. They may not write it, but they should provide the requirement to the team. From that point, the scrum master of the team can take it, flesh it out, and then provide the estimation, and then use sprint planning to determine when this can be done and how long it might take. The product owner then can contribute to the definition of done and determine what it takes to be accepted as complete. Let's talk about the format of a user story. How should a user story be constructed that differentiates it from a traditional requirement? First of all, it needs to be structured as follows. As a role, typically a user role, system user, customer, I would like, what are we asking for? A description of functionality. Again, this is kind of a general description. We're not getting deep into the technical or functional requirements. And finally, so that I can, what's the reason for requests? What is the goal that needs to be accomplished for this to be successful? And if we look at this backwards, we feel that this final one is the most important. Many times we've had the business come to us, well, I want this report. And then when you look at this from a user story perspective, rationalizing or understanding what they're really after, a lot of times you can reduce scope as you focus what the reason for a request is and can narrow down the functionality and limit the effort that has started out very broad and maybe too all encompassing.
Now let's give an example of how a user story should be constructed, what format you want to use.
Let's now look at our Agile tool Jira, in which we've constructed many user stories. We've got the one specific for this example that we will select here. And we've characterized this and noted user story just to differentiate it from other things such as tasks. And the format is, as we've already displayed, the role you want to talk about. So in this case, as a service user, that is the user of the app. It could be a customer, it could be an employee. We don't differentiate. It's not a different persona. Functionality required is I would like a mobile app that will display the exact location of an order at any stage of the production, fulfillment, and delivery process. So what that implies is it in the factory? Is it on a truck? Is it on a ship? Where is it? And what's the expected delivery date? So the acceptance criteria that we've noted here, it's very important to have this, otherwise it's very difficult to determine if you've met the requirement. So the functionality should work on a custom application that can be used on an iPhone, iPad, and a Samsung Galaxy phone. We don't get into specific versions here. We could get that granular if you wanted to. And the functionality should be tested using actual production data copied into a demo environment. So what is that? We take production, you do a copy over, and then run it from a test environment so you don't mess up production data.
And now here are 5 rules for user stories.
One of the great benefits of user stories is that it's a different way of looking at a requirement that almost insists, demands that the business really think about what they're asking for, as opposed to before where they just give you a laundry list of things to do without much thought. A user story requires it put in perspective of the user to determine what is really needed. With that, let's define our 5 basic rules for user stories. The first is again what we just talked about. Use personas to define the story from their perspective. And the persona is nothing more than the part of the as a role construct. So as a user, a system user, And for this, the product owner should really be involved defining this persona. Because again, this is going to justify what the business is asking for. We need to determine the persona, the user, the role that really needs this so that we truly understand the story and the fundamental requirement. Next is rule 2, create stories collaboratively. Now, it should be no surprise that with Agile, we recommend working as a team for most things, and this is no exception. For creating stories, if it comes from the product owner, which it might be, still the product owner and the team should work together to really add details, think about the personas, the ask, and define it thoroughly. And then within that, look at the story. Don't look at it as a finished task necessarily when it's first created. Constantly work to refine, rewrite, and perfect the story to where it gets perfect acceptance criteria, definition of done, and maybe plans for a demo at the end of the sprint, ideally, which we stress all the time. If you think about it from a perspective of writing, like I've written a few books in my time, you're never really done. You've written maybe the first draft, second draft, third draft. We'll take a similar approach with user stories to get them right, and it does take time. All right, wake up. We're not quite done yet. All right, going now to rule 3, keep stories concise. And the idea of user story is really to be a pointer, is to summarize a requirement and the user issue. So stories should be a pointer to additional information. This should not be a replacement for your more detailed specification documents, such as functional and technical specs, commonly used in the SAP and ERP environments. So you want to stress that use a story as a placeholder and to contain the information, but always be prepared to have links, especially for a very complex story. You're going to have functional and technical specifications in addition to the story. Jumping through our next two, we've got rule 4, keep stories visible. And what we're talking about here is both physically visible and also electronically visible so that everybody can see it, participate, and feel engaged. So to start, we highly recommend using physical paper cards, sticky notes, put up on the wall, everybody sees them. Then once you get comfortable with that, move to the Agile tools like we've demonstrated here, Jira, Rally, version 1. There's several out there, and get to that. But do that second. Start physically because we love the team engagement. Everybody loves putting up the sticky notes, moving them across, is that physical feeling of accomplishment. And again, Agile is all about the team. So start off when everybody's engaged and moving things along, and then you kind of advance, as I noted, to tools like Jira and such to begin tracking. So you make sure anyone can see it, visible to management and all the team. For rule 5, we want to start thinking ahead. Start planning for the demo at the end of the sprint. And it seems like that's far ahead, but as part of sprint planning, as you're working on this user story, rule 5 is plan towards a demo. This is a key part of sprint planning. And we found that by doing this, thinking about a user story in context of how you would include it in a demo really helps you to visualize what the requirement truly is. And we definitely know that not all stories are visual. Not all stories can be included in a demo, but for those that are, think about it in this context really helps flesh out the requirement, flesh out the story to make it that much more complete.
Thanks for watching our video. Please subscribe to our channel and join us next time.